And they say, well, it's a carbohydrate. I say, yes, but it is a non-caloric carbohydrate. You don't gain weight from it. And they say, you don't? Oh my gosh, I'll eat more of it. I say, hooray.
This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, ultra-processed foods. But first, it's time for us to unpack one of the world's most beloved drinks in a segment we call Health or Hype. That's right, it's time we talk about coffee. At this point, we've heard it all. Coffee obviously helps with energy, and it reduces the risk of Parkinson's, type 2 diabetes, gallstones, Alzheimer's, metabolic syndrome, and liver cancer. These are all true, by the way. But can it make you live longer? That's the claim in a study recently publicized by the New York Times. This study by the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics found that those who consumed 1 to 3 cups of coffee per day were about 15% less likely to die within the next decade than those who didn't drink coffee. This research was not peer-reviewed, but they did observe 400,000 people for 14 years, and the findings are consistent with other large studies. What's the connection between coffee and a long life? Nutritionally, coffee has hundreds of components, including vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that help protect your cells from damage. So is it health or hype? We can confidently say that this one counts as health. But beware. Although coffee may help you live longer, some people may experience anxiety, nervousness, increased blood pressure, palpitations, insomnia, headache, reflux, and urinary symptoms. So if you want to be around for your grandkids, brew yourself a cup of bean juice. Just make sure you're drinking responsibly. Got a nutrition trend you want me to unpack? Send us a voicemail at 507-538-6272. I'd love to hear what strange or new ideas you've seen out there. Now, on to the show. Nearly every episode of On Nutrition mentions ultra-processed foods, so you can probably guess what we might say. Don't eat them. But that's just not realistic. Around 70% of our food supply is ultra-processed, and factors like time, taste, habit, and convenience make them pretty enticing. So if there's no escaping them, we might as well fully understand them. What makes food processed? How do processed foods impact our bodies? And how do we make healthy choices when it's so easy not to? Here to help me unpack the ultra-processed is Dr. Stephen Kopecky, a cardiologist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Dr. Kopecky specializes in preventing and reversing heart disease and has seen the impact of whole foods in the lives of his patients and his own family. Hi, Dr. Kopecky.
Hello, Ms. Schmidt.
I feel like I've roped you into more than one of these in the past few years.
Well, this is a really great subject.
And it's something that I think both you and I care about and are interested in. Almost everyone, even health professionals like ourselves, we eat ultra-processed foods in some way or another. Do you have a favorite? Are you willing to disclose your favorite ultra-processed food?
Well, I'm a very normal person, so I love the world's most popular cookie, Oreos. I actually once bought a bag of Oreos, ate one, and threw the rest away.
You just needed the one.
Well, I knew that if I had the bag with me, guess what would happen to them? They would end up in my mouth.
Trigger and response. I feel like mine would be that straight up orange macaroni and cheese, which is what moms do nowadays because we don't have time to sit down or make it from scratch. But let's start by talking through this range of processed food because anything from a grape to a Dorito can be processed. Tell me about the spectrum we use to determine how processed a food is.
They called it Nova, which means new, and it came from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil from a Dr. Monteiro. I've been down to his university, and food is a big part of their culture, making meals and enjoying them and enjoying some coffees. They have great coffee down there, et cetera. So he started putting these things together about the food system and started looking at data of what foods seem to increase mortality, what foods seem to lower mortality, what foods increase blood pressure, decrease blood pressure, things like that. And actually then put together these 4 food process groups and has made a very good case for it. And it's picked up all over the world now. Governments are starting to talk about this and saying, hey, we need to look at our food policy and our food laws differently because we are actually increasing mortality by eating these foods.
Okay, so what are these 4 levels of processed foods?
Everything is processed to a certain degree. So Level 1 is a minimally processed or a fresh type of food. Like you take green beans and you freeze them or put them in a plastic bag. That's level 1. Level 2 would be processed culinary ingredients, things like oats, like pasta, that you still have to cook, but they've done some things to them. They've had to refine them some. Third would be, ready to consume products. And some aren't so bad, like jerky. It's a whole food, basically, but they put some things in it, some salt, and some preservatives.
A lot of salt, yes.
Oh, yeah, a lot of salt, or sugar, or oil, or all the above. And then finally is the ultra-processed. And the ultra-processed, the level 4, are essentially industrial formulations that are mostly or entirely made up from industrial ingredients, typically containing little or no whole foods. It's not like a pea in there or a bean or an apple. It's things like chips or cookies or colas, open and eat, heat and eat, the things you find in the checkout aisle of the grocery store.
You and I could not replicate these in our own kitchens, as talented chefs as we are, right? This level 4, there's no way we have the ingredients, the equipment. That's how I think of it. I used to say if my grandma doesn't know how to make it, it's likely ultra processed.
Yeah, that's a good point. That really is true.
I think it's important to, like you said, call out that being a processed food does not mean this is a bad food, right? Because even if your grocery store washes your apples, that sounds nice. That's processed, right? Like someone has done something to the apple. Or I recommend that my patients grab a veggie tray if they don't want to cut up their own vegetables, and someone else chopping that celery for you and washing it, hopefully, is processing it. So do you find that people think it's either processed or not processed and kind of forget this spectrum?
That, or else they just don't even notice it at all. I think everybody knows that some of the chips and things like that in little bags are ultra-processed foods, but they kind of overlook it. In fact, when I ask patients sometimes, do you ever eat ultra-processed? Oh, no, I never do that. I haven't done that in years. I said, well, do you go to a sandwich shop and get the chips with your sandwich? Oh, yeah. Well, so that's ultra-processed. It is? Oh, it is. Yeah, I forgot.
So what do you think people forget about in terms of this is a processed food, but people don't recognize it as a processed food? So you mentioned like green beans. We talk a lot about flash frozen vegetables being absolutely great and potentially even more nutritious than the fresh. Do you want to talk about the story that we tell?
The Mayo brothers, the story goes, they called their pathologist, Dr. Wilson, and said, we have this patient on the table. Is there cancer in here? And he said, well, I need to stain it and look at it. It'll take a couple of days. And they said, well, we can't wait that long. So he actually, one January, put one of the slides he made out on the windowsill, and it froze almost instantly, a very thin slide of tissue. And he could then look at it under the microscope and said, oh, there's a cancer cell. And that's where this term flash frozen or the frozen specimens, comes from. And he invented that. About 10 years later, Bird's Eye, the original Bird's Eye of, flash frozen vegetables and such, patented it. Mayo, we didn't patent it. We don't patent things like that. We give them away. So if you or I eat a blueberry up here in January in Minnesota, it was probably picked somewhere in South America a few weeks ago, and it starts decaying almost as soon as they pick it. So a flash frozen blueberry has more nutrition and is actually a lot cheaper than the fresh when you're picking or buying them asynchronously.
I hear a lot of patients say, I won't eat that because it's processed. Like they actually think, like your blueberries example, that frozen fruits or vegetables are processed and therefore bad. I also give the example of things like canned tuna. If I've asked you to adhere to a Mediterranean style diet and you're not going to fly your salmon in from Alaska because you don't have the means to do that, I think canned tuna, canned salmon or in the pouch is a great option, but that's going to come in a package. It's going to be in a can. And I don't like the assumption that the number of ingredients on something also means bad, right? Because we have fortification of our foods and now we no longer have rickets and things like that. So I don't always want it to be, if it has more than 5 ingredients, that equals bad, because I don't think that's true for a lot of things. But you could also make the argument that ultra processed foods, especially those group 4, those are going to have a lot of ingredients and a lot that we don't carry around in our kitchens.
Yeah, certainly if you see some ingredients that you can't pronounce that have long words, like mono something or other, glutamate, pretty highly processed.
What are the most common processed foods you hear people talk about in clinic? Is there one that you hear about most often?
It's kind of age dependent. Younger patients are big on cereals because they grow up eating a lot of cereals. We sell 2.8 billion boxes of ultra processed cereal in this country every year.
Wow.
That's with a B, billion. So obviously sugar sweetened beverages or beverages that aren't sugar sweetened. They have artificial sweetener in them, and those can be tough on us also. Fast food is ultra processed. Still life happens and you got to stop somewhere and get some lunch if you're busy and, you grab what you can.
It would be so difficult to completely avoid them. I almost want to say impossible because I want to drink milk that's been processed so that it's safer for me.
Very true. It does save a lot of lives. There's no doubt. The pasteurization and the cleaning and things like that are very helpful.
Baby formula, right? No one can replicate making baby formula, but baby formula saves lives.
And face it, there are many cities in the world that are over 10 million people, and you cannot feed a 10 million person city without a lot of ultra-processed foods because it stores well.
I say that about GMOs, right? Like we could not feed our planet if there weren't some genetically modified crops like corn and wheat.
Oh yeah, look at an avocado. Everybody loves now. 100,000 years ago, it was a tiny little hard thing that had very little avocado pulp in it.
If we were all making our own bread like we were in COVID, it goes moldy very, very quickly as opposed to buying the processed bread. So there are absolutely some pieces of processing that really benefit us in the big picture.
Yes, that's very true.
Coverage varies by plan. View contracts and exclusions at endurancewarranty.com.
This is an announcement to all United States vehicle owners who own a 2003 or newer vehicle with a manufacturer's warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all. With the struggling economy and the cost of living on the rise, Endurance is now offering an affordable, low-cost vehicle coverage plan to the general public. As of today, you could be one of millions of drivers that now may qualify to have your vehicle protected under this coverage and have all future covered auto repairs paid directly to the repair shop for you. You pick your plan, you pick your deductible, you even pick the repair shop. Roadside service, towing, and rental coverage is included. To all United States vehicle owners who own a 2003 or newer vehicle with a manufacturer's warranty about to expire, get your vehicle protected now and save your wallet from costly vehicle repairs. For your free 5-minute quote and to see if you qualify, visit EnduranceWarranty.com. EnduranceWarranty.com.
Thanks to the NOVA classification system, we can further understand the spectrum of processed foods. Group 1 is the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This includes flash frozen vegetables, pre-washed or pre-cut produce. Group 1 is the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This includes flash frozen vegetables, pre-washed or pre-cut produce. Group 2 contains the processed culinary ingredients like your oatmeal, butter, or honey. Group 3 are those ready-to-consume products like applesauce or canned fish. They usually contain more sugar, salt, or oil. And Group 4 is the majority, ultra-processed foods, the items we can't exactly make from scratch, things like sodas, artificially flavored crackers, or candy. According to some estimates, U.S. adults get more than half of their daily calories from this category. But these NOVA groups aren't necessarily good or bad. In many cases, processed food can be fortified with vitamins or cleaned to make our food healthier or safer, or at the very least, to make our lives easier. Now that we know the range of processed food, let's talk about what makes them so enticing and how they impact our bodies. So we've talked about how processing foods can be helpful, like making out-of-season produce available or pasteurizing products like milk. But what about all the additives? What's the long-term impact?
Yes, the cleanliness part of the processing is really good, but some of these additives are for preservatives too. But of course, a lot of that is sodium, and that's part of the problems with these ultra-processed meats that we tend to put on our sandwiches and eat. They have a lot of sodium in them, and that's probably a third of what causes the increased mortality with these ultra-processed foods. It's just the raising of blood pressure from the sodium. Processed foods are unfortunately very pro-inflammatory.
Yes.
And so if you eat 100 grams of ultra-processed food, that's associated, studies have shown, with about a 4% increase in your CRP concentration, which is something we use frequently to monitor inflammation inside your body. And inflammation is a process by which your tissues get irritated. And if it's in the heart, it can cause heart attack problems. If it's in the gut, it causes gut problems. The brain causes brain problems, et cetera.
We talk a lot about inflammation. I feel like many people are looking for a quote, anti-inflammatory diet or supplement out there. So when you stated the fact about ultra-processed foods being harmful, essentially, in larger amounts, are we talking about the whole spectrum, the 1 through 4, or would you assume that it's more of the group 3 and group 4 categories that are harmful?
Yeah, I would say group 3 and 4. The 2s, the oats, the pastas, all that can be not so good if you eat a whole bunch of them. I had a patient call me one day and said, I want to sue the American Heart Association. And I said, really? Why? He said, well, because I'm fat. And I said, really? Tell me more. He said, well, I'm eating whole grains and I'm overweight. And they said I could eat whole grains. I said, great. Well, tell me what you eat. And he told me breakfast, lunch, dinner. I said, you're eating about 20 servings of whole grains a day. And show me where the American Heart said eat 20 servings of them. They say eat 1 or 2. So no matter what you eat, it's a portion amount also that's important. But if you eat ultra-processed foods, say you eat a almond powder versus an almond. The studies have shown if you eat a whole almond and chew it up, your microbiome, which is all the organisms in our gut, which there's more of them in us than there is our cells in us, that they have a hard time breaking down the whole, chunks of almond so they don't get as many calories out of it. But if you eat an almond powder that's basically pulverized and made into an almond cookie or something, then you gain more calories out of that same amount of almond powder as you would out of the whole almond. And that can also make you overweight, in addition to being somewhat pro-inflammatory.
And I guess I would also question, are there some nutrients that are stripped in that process, right? So is this product now lower in fiber than it originally was? Have we lost some of the good things that we wanted in that more whole foods product?
Yeah, very true. And we can say, well, an apple is healthy if you eat the apple. So they take the apple and they squeeze it and they put it in juice and say, here, this is healthy. And we say, well, we don't know that. What happened to all the stuff that was in the skin? There are a lot of micronutrients. We don't even know if they're in the juice or not. And it's not only the micronutrients, but the amount of them that's in there together, because they're permissive to each other to help make us healthier.
That is always my argument with patients about putting it in a blender and making a smoothie, as opposed to juicing, all that pulp that kind of gets spit out. I want that stuff back in what you're drinking.
Right. Yeah. And they say, well, it's a carbohydrate. I say, yes, but it is a non-caloric carbohydrate. You don't gain weight from it. And they say, you don't? Oh my gosh, I'll eat more of it. I say, hooray.
No one's in our offices because they ate too many apples.
Very true.
Do you think that ultra-processed foods are created by the food industry to make us crave them, want them more, make it hard for us to put that bag of chips down?
I mean, they are publicly held companies, and their goal is to make money for their stockholders. And the profit margin on ultra-processed food is very high. The profit margin on a fresh food, a whole food, an apple, a pear, or whatever, is very low. So you want to sell things that have high profit margins. And when they first started developing them, they realized very early on that if they put in certain amounts of sweets, sugars, they put in certain amounts of fats, as you eat that, you get this pow feeling and this surge. And you think, wow, this is really great. I'm going to eat more of these. If you look at the things that are used to assess addiction, like, do you try to quit and you can't? Do you try to hide it from your spouse? Does it interrupt your day? Do you go out of your way in your day to get some of this substance? It sounds like alcohol or smoking, but it also can be applied to ultra-processed foods. And unfortunately, some of the most addicting foods read like a teenager's menu: chips, dips, cheeseburgers, fries, ice cream, macaroni and cheese.
You mentioned salt, sugar, fat, and these are things that make our food taste good, right? Are those the culprit, or is there something else that's going on with the processing that creates the craving?
It clearly is the things that we feel the quickest, meaning if you get an immediate response, which you do with sugar. In fact, we went to visit our only grandchild, a 1.5 years old, and we were staying at a hotel and they were all up asleep. So I took them downstairs and I got him some apple juice with a straw. And he takes a little sip of it And then his eyes got real big, and I don't think he breathed again until that cup was drained. So his parents come down and said, "Oh, what did you give him?" I said, "Oh, I got him some apple juice." "You did what? You gave him apple juice?"
Dr. Kopecky.
I said, "What do you give him?" So we give him milk and water. I said, "Oh my God." And so once you open that Pandora's box, it's hard because they get an immediate response.
And that's actually something that I've talked about with my patients who are actually going through a treatment program for addiction at Mayo, in that sometimes when people are no longer using their drug or beverage of choice that was an addictive substance, they find themselves kind of craving candy or eating sweets. Some of was it appetite suppression, where you're getting calories from that substance. But I talk a lot about it likely being their brain seeking out dopamine. They were getting dopamine from something else. We're not using that anymore, which is fabulous. And now I'm going to go seek it out in the most convenient way, which is candy or juice.
And if you think about it, we never really had sweets, 10,000, 100,000 years ago. They were in only certain fruits, if you could find them during season, honey, things like that. They weren't on every street corner. We didn't have sugar, so to speak.
And I think that this is a good time then to bring up our palate, right? So how often are we exposed to extremely salty things, extremely sugary things, be it natural or artificial sweeteners? And so now when we taste something like an apple, apples don't taste sweet. They kind of taste boring, and pineapple is sour. But if we were to truly reduce our intake of the added sugars, natural and artificial, fruits like apples and pineapple would taste sweet to our taste buds.
That's been shown very well in studies. When we eat these super sweet things, especially the artificial sweeteners, which grain for grain is 1,000 times sweeter than sugar, when we go to eat something that's naturally sweet, we don't like it as much, and we put something on it to make it sweeter. And actually, the beverage companies have tracked that very well. They have shown that as they take salt out of some of the snack foods, they see their sales decline. And then as they put it back in, they'll see their sales come back. That's why they sell it to us, because we buy it.
We started to get into it, but let's talk more about the health risks, because we're ingesting ingredients that have an impact on our long-term health, right? What are some of the risks of consuming ultra-processed food?
If you look at how many ultra-processed servings we eat in America per day, the average American eats over 7 ultra-processed servings a day. I mean, where your mortality starts to go up, and this is death, cardiovascular death, starts to go up above about 2 servings a day.
2?
And 2 servings a day.
Yikes.
And so we eat on average about 7. And also ultra-processed foods are now the number one cause of dementia, so not just heart attacks. So we really have to be careful with that. The younger we are, the more ultra-processed foods we eat. There was a recent very interesting study of ultra-processed foods at lunch, when school lunches.
Yeah.
And they found that there was about 60%, 60% of lunches at school that you buy were ultra-processed foods. And they said, we got to change the school food. I said, let's look at, just when they bring food from home. Well, it was higher, because parents get busy. They put something in their kids' lunch that's, an ultra-processed type of package, and it's actually more. So now, why are those things bad? There's really 4 parts of the ultra-processed food. One is that there's additives in it, and they're things like, they're sweeteners. And some of the sweeteners actually increase cardiac mortality. And erythritol is a sweetener. And erythritol has been shown to activate our platelets, which are little cells that clot. When you have increased clotting, then you can have increased heart attacks. Other things, there are chemicals in there, emollients and things that sound pretty good, like seaweed or carrageenan and things like that. But they actually have some other emulsifiers with them that are not that healthy. The third is, we talked about it, the sugars, the fats, less fiber. But the fourth thing that I really think is the most bothersome, that we're going to learn more and more about in the next decade, is the gut microbiota.
Yes.
These microorganisms that are in our gut. And if we didn't have them, we couldn't absorb nearly as much calories as we do, because they start breaking down our food. So we have to be very nice to these little organisms that are inside of us. Why? Because they are part of our immune system. And as we give them certain foods, especially ultra-processed, the sugars, the salts, things like that, they use that as an energy source, and more bad microbiota groups can grow, and the healthy ones don't grow as much. And that affects the permeability of our gut, which can make us sick in many ways, not just throwing up, but also depression, anxiety, heart attacks, high blood pressure, cancers, etc.
Yeah, and this is not a medical diagnosis or recognized as one, but you hear a lot about people saying leaky gut syndrome, and that's exactly what you were talking about. In terms of ingredients that harm the microbiota, I've never once heard that a whole or plant food was harmful. It's always emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners. And what we tell people to do to improve their microbiome is, of course, to eat more variety of plants, fiber.
Yes, very true.
I think there are also some specific ingredients that people are fearful of. So MSG is an example, red dye, nitrates, high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated fats. Do we need to be looking for these? Do we need to be scared of these?
We should be concerned about them, and especially the dyes. Some of those are carcinogens and such, and those are being found all the time. And, our son is very organic. He's a crunchy granola guy. He has these bars. He says they're organic, Dad. They're good. And I say they may be organic, but they're high fructose corn syrup organic. They're full of all this sugar stuff. But it's tough to get away from them. And the main thing you want to be sure about is the partially hydrogenated fats, which have now been outlawed in this country because it increases your cholesterol and such. I think these foods that have a lot of added fats to them, added sodium to them, monosodium glutamate, there's sodium in there that enhances the flavor of the food, especially certain cultural foods have a lot of that.
Is that a guidance that you give patients? Aim for less than 2 servings of processed foods a day? How do you help people navigate how to do that?
Well, I tell them, life happens. You go to family reunions, and guess what? It's got Aunt Tilly's potato salad, a huge bowl that could feed the army of the world. But you love it. Have some. Or you're on a trip and you can't stop at every diner that just serves whole foods. That's just impossible. And so you really have to, pick your battles and when you can control it, which means when you're eating at home. Everybody can eat a pretty good breakfast. It can be short and brief, like you said, a smoothie, something like that they could make. Dinners could be also very good. Make it a family event, especially with kids. Give them a knife that isn't sharp and they can sit there and cut and they have a great time doing it. Where you get into trouble is lunch and on weekends. And with lunch, try to find somewhere you can go or bring some leftover from yesterday. Weekends, you go to a friend's house or a neighborhood picnic, it's buyer beware. But when you can control it, try to control it as best you can.
Yes. I will sometimes say, especially for my patients who travel a lot or who are in even environments that don't allow for food, whatever it may be, that limits their availability, I'll say what you do have control over is how much and potentially how often you have those kind of foods. So if you love Oreos, that's okay. But how many and how often?
You don't have to eat the whole bag, you mean?
If they're mini, they don't count. Can ultra-processed foods be addicting? Well, yes. Food manufacturers tend to make more money from tastier food, and there's no doubt that ultra-processed foods can be much more appealing than less processed ones. So what are the health impacts? Besides the risk of weight gain, high sodium can lead to increased blood pressure, a risk factor for heart disease, heart attack, or stroke. And the pro-inflammatory effect of ultra-processed food can increase inflammation in your heart, gut, and brain, meaning increased risk of heart issues, dementia, and lowered immunity. The risk of dying from a cardiovascular condition increases after 2 servings of ultra-processed foods per day, while the average American has about 7. So how do we curb these risks? Cooking a variety of plant-based meals, and as always, being mindful of your portions. But like we said, these foods are everywhere. So let's explore how to navigate an ultra-processed world. So when you pick up something at the grocery store or when you're walking down an aisle, how could someone know this is an ultra-processed foods? Do you go by how long the list of ingredient is? Do you care if it's in a can or if it's minute rice instead of rice that takes 20 minutes to cook?
Well, if it's ever advertised on Saturday morning, it's probably ultra-processed. But, one thing that has changed how my wife and I buy food is the Yucca app, Yuka. It's got like 40 million people in this country that use it. It's based on three things. One is the food. Some foods are healthier than others. Apple's healthier than a hot dog. It depends on how much additives are in it. And the third thing, is it organic or not? But you aim it at the barcode, and within a couple of seconds, it will give you a score. It'll tell you all the different ingredients that are in it. And you can use it also for creams you put on your body, because those are absorbed also. And so we picked something up the other day that we eat all the time, like some ketchup, and it was like a score of 8 out of 100. And why? Because half the calories are sugar. And you don't really think of that. And so we got another ketchup that was 3 times as expensive, but it didn't have any sugar in it, but it was a less amount for the same price. So that's really changed how we do things, how we buy things. There's certain foods we just know that are ultra processed, but a lot we don't, especially dressings, salad dressings. Mm-hmm. We say, I'm eating a salad, I'm eating healthy. Yeah, but you're putting about 300 calories of, some ultra processed dressing on top of it, which kind of negates the benefit of the salad.
And what processed foods should you actually put in your shopping cart at the grocery store? Because like we've said, some processed foods can be good for you.
They really have a great role to play. So the things that are processed that are healthy and makes them the foods cheaper, like the frozen veggies, the frozen fruits, that really are quite easy to cook. And you can put them in a pan and heat them up very quickly and get a great nutritious meal. Just would like to see that we start to pay more attention to those things, and less attention to the things we get through calling a food service to bring it to our house for an extra few dollars.
I liked that you brought up, how does eating the processed food, or even ultra-processed food, impact you? So to argue against this kind of fear-mongering, I'll say, well, if someone is using, let's say, yogurt to get some protein in the morning, and they are trying to get their vitamin D and their calcium in, that's better, possibly, than the alternative, right? So what about the canned tuna? Bringing a pouch to their lunch is more helpful than not, because otherwise it would be a sandwich, which is absolutely processed, or they wouldn't have fish at all. So I typically will ask, what's your baseline? And has this been helpful for you, frozen vegetables versus no vegetables? Or are we just adding another ultra-processed food to your diet?
I think that one way to look at this is, what we have started doing is not using any extra sodium at home. You tend to eat saltier things when you're out and around. And this way, when we don't eat the sodium, when we do go eat something that is really salty, we notice it immediately. We get very thirsty.
Movie theater popcorn, I think, is disgusting because it is so incredibly salty compared to likely what you and I have as a baseline. It burns my tongue.
Unfortunately, it does taste a little delicious sometimes.
Of course.
But I encourage people to use more spices. And they say, I do, doctor. I take turmeric pills every day. I said, no, don't take the pill. Try to cook with it. Put it on your food and figure out what flavors you like, if it's rosemary or basil or some of these others, and just use it. And those actually have been shown to be quite healthy. And a lot of these have been used as medicines since time began almost.
And that's the argument that I give when people say, well, if you're going to ask me to limit this, it's going to taste bland, or I'm not going to like those kind of things. And I just think that likely in America, we need to improve our skills on using herbs and spices, because I don't think we do as other countries, likely also because we have so many ultra-processed foods that we very heavily rely on.
Yeah, the other thing is suggest to people, as I know you do, is grow something. In just a pot on the windowsill. It can be, a 6-inch pot, doesn't matter. Growing something, I think, is, number one, very satisfying. Number two, it teaches you a whole life cycle in a few months. And you learn that just a little bit of water, a little bit of care, a little bit of weeding at different times, the plant grows beautifully. And the same thing can be used on our bodies. A little bit of exercise here and there, a little bit of stress reduction, a little bit of sleep, a little bit of eating healthy. Those things really do add up.
That's incredible. Are you the one who says just one bite? Like one bite of something can actually make a difference. Tell us what you mean when you use that phrase.
There was a very interesting study just a few years ago that very nicely showed that a 1% increase in ultra-processed foods in our diet, which literally is one bite. If you think you have 100 bites of food in a day, that 1% increase in ultra-processed food in your diet is associated with a 1% increase in cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, things like that. So studies have shown that just one bite of a switch, meaning switching a ultra-processed, lunch meat for something like a black bean, one bite, and after a couple of years will lower your risk of a heart attack. Just changing one egg yolk, putting just the egg white with something else in there that you cook, some onions or some peppers, whatever, just one bite of that will lower your risk also after a couple of years. And the more risk factors you have for heart disease, the more it helps you. Meaning if you're overweight or you don't exercise or you're stressed or you smoke or have diabetes, these just one bites are even more beneficial. And you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
We're humans. We can't change quickly. We have to change very slowly.
And I think that even slowly incorporating less ultra-processed foods into our cooking, but still balancing that with some processed foods is a good place to start. So I tried to make homemade pasta once with my husband as a date night, and it was not as fun or romantic as it seems. We were frustrated. I think we overneeded.
They'll love it.
So after that experience, I'm going to continue to buy pasta because it was a lot of work and a lot of time and not that fun. But I can add vegetables to that. I can maybe make my own marinara sauce instead of buying it. I can use a extra virgin olive oil when I'm making the vegetable that goes along with it. So even combining the two, okay, I need to use frozen veggies tonight because we all got home late and we need to eat something. So yeah, that is processed, but I'm adding it to something that is not.
That's a great point. We don't all have time to do this at certain points in our life, but learning a little bit about cooking. Mm-hmm. I've taken some cooking classes, so we can walk in at night, my wife and I, and within 20 minutes of unlocking the house, I can have a dinner on the table with a beautiful salad with some protein on it. Could be a fish, could be a chicken, a dressing that we make with some olive oil and some balsamic vinegar and spices, and to have it all ready to go. And it's very healthy, very enjoyable, very filling, and you can do it very quickly.
That takes planning, right? You need to have those groceries accessible to you as well. So I always have patients take a step back. Tell me why you had to eat out for lunch today. Well, because I didn't bring a lunch. Why didn't you bring a lunch? Well, I didn't have any food in the house, or I didn't have the time. So you really have to be intentional about having these things around, and then ideally not wasting it, because the spinach in my crisper drawer gets dead real fast if you don't use it up.
Right.
You switched how your refrigerator looks, right?
We did move, and we got this beautiful refrigerator and had this little slot you'd put frozen pizzas in and all this stuff. And then there was two little drawers in the bottom that were opaque. You couldn't see in them. One said fruits, one said vegetables. And so, you put stuff in there and you forget about it till Christmas or something. And so we had to take all the ultra processed stuff and the butters and the oils and the fats and such and put them in those drawers, and then put the veggies, the cabbage, the asparagus, all that, where we can see it at eye level. Because you taught me, Tara, that a human will eat one of the first three things they see in the fridge when they open it up. There it is. Boom. Let's eat it. So you got to make it at eye level and make it the thing that gets your attention.
You mentioned cultural aspects of eating and food. One of the reasons I think we struggle is because of how quickly we expect things or need things, right? I go from school to baseball practice to soccer practice, and then I'm home and have whatever. Or you and I never have a lunch hour. We're given a meeting that you're allowed to eat during. So how can people, knowing that we're in a rush and that ultra-processed food is convenient to grab in a rush, how can we add more fresh, whole foods to our day, not pretend like we're going to chop a pineapple between practices if you don't have the time for that, or bring a singular ingredient protein and cook it in our lunch hour meeting?
There are certain things in nature that are preserved. The three foods, and you teach me about this, but one is nuts, one is seeds, and one is honey. So nuts and seeds are great to eat, before a meal. If you have a snack at 10 in the morning, then it's been shown you'll eat a little less at lunchtime. And don't eat them as part of the lunch, eat them before the meal, and don't snack on them after supper, because then there's no meal to feel full for. The second thing is there are other things that are easy to carry around. Tangerines, pears, bananas, apples, and you can put them in a bag. You can take them with you. I mean, you can't make a whole meal out of 16 apples or something like that, but it can be part of it, and they're nice for a dessert sometimes. So add that in and just take a few bites less of something else. Order the smaller hamburger when you go to the hamburger store, the single patty or the small one. Then have a couple of things with you that you can supplement your food with and let that grow over time.
I think you and I both emphasize adding in terms of nutrition as opposed to subtracting. So if you're going to eat lunch out every day because that's your company culture or because you need to or because you choose to, why don't we just pack an apple, only an apple, and eat it midday? I didn't take anything away from you. I didn't say that you couldn't go out with your coworkers for lunch, but I added an apple, which one is fabulous, and two, maybe I positively impacted your lunch. You had a few less fries, for example.
Nothing you do is ever too small.
Thank you so much for being here again, Dr. Kopecky. I appreciate all of your wisdom and expertise.
Thank you, Tara Schmidt. It's always great to speak with you.
In this day and age, it's nearly impossible to live your life without encountering processed and ultra-processed foods. But you can be more mindful of how and when you consume them. And there's nothing wrong with buying frozen fruits and veggies, even if they are minimally processed. Cooking with herbs, growing your own, and carrying nuts and fruits around can help you break out of the preference for processed food. Remember, the health risks of an ultra-processed diet are reversible. You can prevent heart disease and other conditions one bite at a time. That's all for this episode. But if you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272. We'll answer it in a future episode. On the next episode of On Nutrition...
Why do you need a shake with 40 grams of protein? You're 5'3". You absolutely will not need that much protein in a protein shake.
For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.